Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to HED Talks. And welcome back, John. Happy to have you back. Yeah, go right ahead. So today we are going to wrap up what? It's the end of the Plantagenet Dynasty. Who knows, who remembers how long did the House of Plantagenet reign?
Over 100 years.
300 years.
300?
Excellent. Yes, exactly 331 years. 331 years. And it's all going to come crashing down today. Are you ready?
Yes.
Okay, let's get going. All right, so we have to figure out how we got to where we are, and I'm going to take you through that quickly so that we can fully understand what is happening here. So we all remember what happened to Henry VI, right? He had very severe mental illness, remember?
Yes.
And remember, he was so severely devastated and overwhelmed by the loss of lands in France that what happened to him? Excellent, catatonic. I heard somebody say that. I think that was Esther, yes? Excellent, excellent. So for over a year, he's in a catatonic state. He cannot rule. He cannot make decisions. He cannot run the country. And so who did they call in? Richard. They call in Richard. He's next in line because to this point, Henry doesn't have an heir, remember? There's no heir. He's married, but they don't have an heir yet. They haven't had a child yet. So they call in Richard, who is his cousin, and they're accusing him, after he's kind of saved the day, they're accusing him of having ulterior motives. Now remember this? They asked him. They brought him in from Ireland. They had him come in, and then they turn around and call him treasonous. And when we look in the historical documents, we're not seeing evidence of that. There is no evidence of that. And the strongest piece is something kind of simple, and it has to do with his three sons. Remember the three sons?
Yeah.
We have Edward, George, and Richard. They all become quite famous, don't they? All right, and so what is it about the sons? Well, if you had an ulterior motive to take over and usurp the throne, how would you train your eldest son at least?
Military.
Military, exactly. But he didn't do that. All the boys were educated in what? Do you remember?
Estate management.
Excellent. Yes. Oh my gosh, you all remember. Yes. Yes, estate management. That's what they were trained in because he had every intention of raising his sons to manage their land holdings. That's what they were going to do, not become king of England. All right? Now, somehow, and we all kind of snickered over this, somehow the Red Queen, she's Margaret of Anjou, but we've got a couple of Margarets here, so we're calling her the Red Queen. She becomes pregnant, yes, during the time, I guess it happens just before Henry becomes catatonic. So she's expecting, and she has a what? A son. A son. Yes, she has a son. So now we have an heir to the throne. And she is going to be very protective of that child and his inheritance, isn't she? So it becomes especially important when Henry miraculously recovers, doesn't it? It becomes really important because Richard, Duke of York, has been doing a really good job, hasn't he?
Yes.
Yes. He's been handling things. He's been settling the country down. He's been doing pretty well. Henry obviously is unstable. And so what is the Red Queen worried about?
They'll take over.
Yeah, that they'll just keep Richard. They'll just keep Richard, and then what's going to happen to her son? He's going to get cut out. That's her worry. That's her worry. And so she's going to react and take action because she has that fear. So we've got this kind of a situation, all right? So it doesn't appear that that was his intention, but her reaction to the fear of that happening causes her to go after him in a big way. Remember that? She wants to absolutely destroy him. Destroy him. And if she destroys him, that means taking away all of his lands. And is the Duke of York a great landowner? He's a Plantagenet. He's a powerful landowner and was, until this child was born, the next in line to the throne. So is he going to just kind of sit back and let her do that?
No.
Absolutely not. That is not what's going to happen at all. And so now we have the very beginnings of what?
The War of the Roses.
The War of the Roses. And then very quickly we know that it's called the War of the Roses because each house, the House of Lancaster, Henry, and the House of York, Richard, they have on their badges and their crests, one of their symbols is roses. The Lancasters have a red rose and the Yorks have a white rose. And so that's why it's called Wars of the Roses. All right, now there's a lot of support for Richard. He's going to go up against Margaret, the Red Queen. Remember, Henry's kind of out of it. He's not taking the initiative on these things. It's Margaret. She's the one doing this, okay? So there's not insignificant support for Richard, and a lot of that has to do with this. Remember this? He was in France he was in Ireland when France's lands were taken. All right, they have Calais is what's left, just a little teeny pieces left. All right, so there's not insignificant support for Richard to take over, but that is not without its risk, because if you're going to support Richard, what are you? You're a traitor. You're a traitor. And if Richard doesn't come up victorious, what's going to happen to you? Yes, exactly. Off with your head. You are going to lose your head. But there's enough support for Richard, and then there is also support for Henry, and so now we have what we know of as the Wars of the Roses. It's beginning. It's beginning. Now, the Yorkist side is gaining even more support because the Lancaster side, the Queen, the Red Queen's armies, do you remember this?
They were sacking their own people.
Their own people, exactly, yes. They are raiding and pillaging and doing all the horrible things that they do to their own people. So now the commoners are joining forces with the Yorkist armies, and they are going to supply them with food and shelter as they're going through the country having these fights. All right, now I'm going to introduce you to somebody else. Do you remember Margaret Beaufort?
Yeah.
Lady Margaret, and who is she? Do you remember?
Somebody's daughter.
She's somebody's daughter? Yes, that's true. She's
right.
Yes, she's somebody's daughter. All right, she is a descendant of John of Gaunt. But remember, John of Gaunt had a mistress.
That's right.
Remember? Catherine Swynford, and all of the children that those two had are illegitimate because they were not married. All right, and that's the Beaufort line. That's the Beaufort line. So the Beaufort line, can they inherit?
No.
No, they cannot inherit. In fact, they were not recognized for quite a while until the Pope and the King did recognize them, legitimize them, so that they could inherit land and titles. But what could they not do? They could not inherit the throne. They're barred from ever inheriting the throne. So Margaret, and it's important to remember that, All right, her line has no claim. Her line is barred from inheriting the throne. They have no claim to it. All right, but her line did inherit lands, and she's got a lot of land. And because she's got a lot of land, that makes her what?
Highly desirable.
Yes, that makes her very highly desirable. Now, as this is happening, we also have another scandal. Okay, you remember, so Henry VI's mother, after her husband died, she secretly married, remember?
The handsome young man.
The handsome young man, that's exactly right. Named what?
Tudor.
Excellent, yes, his name was Owen Tudor.
Right.
Exactly. And he's got no royal blood, does he?
Not at all.
No, he's not royal blood. She just fell in love with him. He worked in her household, and she fell in love with him, and she married him. Now that means Henry has 3 younger brothers, doesn't he?
Mm-hmm.
They're half-brothers. So these are the 3 younger half-brothers of Henry, who is on the throne right now. And as they grow up, we've got Edmund Jasper and Edward Tudor, that Henry, King of England, is fond of. He's got a relationship with these brothers, and he wants to do something for them. He wants to make sure that they inherit lands and that they do well in life, even though they really don't have much nobility. All right, so in order to raise them up in that area, what Henry does is he's going to arrange a marriage between Edmund, his half-brother, to Margaret Beaufort, who is the great landowner, right? Well, she can't own lands, can she? So if he marries her, all of her land goes where? To him, exactly. All right, so Margaret, we'll get to know her a little bit better, you might recall. For the first 12 years of her life, she's raised in her mother's home, and she is highly educated. She's got a lot of curiosity, she loves to read books, and her mother is going to indulge her. And it's not normal to educate little girls in that way, right? But her mother allows it, and so this is a very intelligent woman. When she's 12 years old, though, what happens to her?
They married her off.
She has to go to the court, doesn't she? Because Henry the King has promised her in marriage to his half-brother, Edmund. And so at 12 years old, she goes to the court. And this is very unusual, even for medieval times. But Edmund does not wait to consummate the marriage with this little girl. He doesn't wait, all right? He does it right away, and at 13, she becomes pregnant. This is such a difficult pregnancy and labor for her, because her body is not developed enough yet to handle this situation. So she's in labor for hours. They said it was a miracle that she and the baby both survived, but they did. It caused such damage to her internally that she could never have any more children. All right? So now she's 13 years old now. She's a 13-year-old girl, and she has this little baby boy who is the son of Margaret Beaufort and Edmund Tudor. And this little boy's name is Henry, because Margaret is smart enough to know, I'm not going to name my son after his father, because where's the power? The king. The power is with her baby's uncle, because now, remember, the king would be his uncle. So she names him Henry. In the meantime, while the poor girl is going through this, her husband is off fighting in these wars, and he is a POW and eventually dies as a POW. There was plague in the prison, and he died from that. So now we've got a 13-year-old girl with an infant, and she's what? She's a widow at 13. Can you imagine?
With a lot of land.
With a lot of land. And so is she in danger? She needs protection, doesn't she? Yes. So this 13-year-old girl takes it upon herself to think of a smart marriage. She wants a smart marriage. And she knows she's got a lot to bargain with because she's got so much land. So she can have a say in this, fortunately. And she chooses a man by the name of Stafford. He comes from a very wealthy family, but he's the second son. Does the second son inherit as much?
No.
So she's got the money and the land, right? And he's got the power. So she doesn't have the power, and he doesn't have the money. So they made a great pair. This was a very smart match for her. And so they get married, and it certainly seems like they had a good marriage, that they had a good relationship. However, in medieval times, in this world, this comes with a very, very severe price. Do you remember the price she had to pay? If a woman remarries, she cannot take her child or children with her into that marriage. All right, the new husband is not responsible for the widow's children. So the child, young Henry, has to go. What the rule is that the child and children will go to the closest male relative. And in this case, it's Jasper. It's Jasper, because Edward, the younger brother, had also died. All right, so there's one brother left. So Jasper Tudor is now the guardian of young Henry. Okay, so she has to give up her child. It's just so sad. It's so sad. They do go to visit him. Stafford and Margaret go to visit Henry. Henry knows who his mother is, but this is still a sad situation. All right, so now back to the wars. What's happening in the wars?
Richard died.
Yes, Richard dies in battle. Now remember, he didn't ask for this, right?
No.
Didn't ask for this. This is kind of tossed onto him, imposed upon him. And when he dies, then who's going to step up? His son, exactly. So his eldest son, Edward, has to step into his father's role. And he wasn't prepared for this. He wasn't educated for this, remember? No, he's going to be a realtor. All right? Yes, he wasn't going to be king. All right, so now he's going to step into this role, and he needs a lot of help. And so he's got one of his father's closest allies, all right, which is the Duke of Warwick. He's the warrior guy. He's the one running the battles, okay? And he's helping Edward to take this on, this unexpected thing on. And it all culminates in this. Do you remember this battle we were talking about? Yes, this battle. 9,000 to 20,000 men died in the span of 12 hours during this battle. It's the bloodiest battle of England's history. And ultimately what comes from the battle is that Edward is crowned. So now we've got Edward, Duke of York, has now been crowned the King of England. But what do we do with Henry? He's got to get out of there, doesn't he? He has to run. All right, so now we've got Henry and Margaret, who we're calling the Red Queen, and their son, and they're going to flee, and they're going to go to Scotland to just get out of there very, very quickly. All right, now it has switched over from Lancaster to York, and that's going to affect Margaret, isn't it? Because she's from the House of Lancaster, right? She's from the House of Lancaster. So that means that Jasper has to get out of there because he's a traitor. He fought for the Lancasters, right? And Margaret, she has to stay because she married Stafford. All right, so she's going to stay there. And what happens to little Henry? Well, one of Edward's men captures him and takes him hostage. He's being held. Little Henry, he was 5 years old at the time, is being held. He's not treated unkindly. He's not like thrown in a dungeon. But he's being captured because he is the nephew of the king. And so even though he doesn't have a claim to the throne, they have to keep an eye on him, right? So he is being held hostage. Now, if power turns over, the former landowners are at risk of what? They're going to lose their lands and their titles. That's what happens when there's a transfer of power. Because remember, who owns all of the land? The king, exactly. That's the way it was. The king owns all of the land, and the king can do whatever he wants with it. He can give it to whomever he chooses. All right? But what Edward wants to do is he realizes that it's kind of split 50-50. Can you see the reds and the pinks here? All right, so the reds are one half is for Edward and the other half are loyalists and they're for Henry. And so he knows that the country is divided right now and he's not secure in his throne, is he? So he wants to reach out, all right, and he wants to make amends with everybody. So he's going to make deals, and basically the deals boil down to this. You can keep your lands and your titles in exchange for loyalty to me, or I will chop your head off. And so most everybody chose loyalty to Edward. All right. Now, some people say that this collaboration with the Lancasters is what made him decide to do what he did with this woman. Here's our third woman that we're being introduced to right now. This is Elizabeth Woodville, and do you know who she is? She is, yes, she is from the House of Lancaster. All right, very low. She doesn't have any nobility or royal blood.
Very beautiful.
Oh, she's very beautiful. It is said that she is the most beautiful woman in all of England. All right. So she lost her husband in these Wars of the Roses. All right. She has 2 sons, and her husband died, and so she kind of makes an arrangement to accidentally bump into the new King of England because she wants to petition for her sons. She wants her sons to inherit their land, but remember, now power has switched over. All right, so we've got Edward, who is a Yorkist, and we've got Elizabeth, who is a Lancaster, and when he sees her, he's just crazy about her. He's just crazy about her, and he wants her, and she says what?
No.
Nope. And so because she's saying no, he starts becoming more interested. And he becomes kind of obsessed with her. So she just continues to say no unless you marry me.
Yeah.
And so guess what he does?
He marries her.
He marries her, but he says, let's keep it a secret. We want to keep this a secret. We don't want to tell anybody about it. And the reason for that is because he is up here and she is down here. All right? And that is not something that's acceptable. It's just not socially acceptable. Not only that, but remember the Duke of Warwick, who is the guy who was helping Edward through this whole thing, he's really running the show for him. He was in France during this time negotiating a political marriage for Edward. All right? And Edward goes behind his back and gets married, making Warwick look like a fool, right? Like he doesn't have the authority that he has. He just made him look like a fool. And he just thought that this was just a really, really bad idea. And so now we've got Elizabeth Woodville that comes into the whole situation. We're going to call her the White Queen. Okay, we have Margaret of Anjou, she's the Red Queen, and then we've got Margaret Beaufort. And it's these three women who are dictating everything that is happening during the War of the Roses. We think it's the men, but it's really these women that are controlling things. So we're going to see how it all plays out between them. All right, now you know Henry, poor Henry. Yeah, he's up there in Scotland, and he's just kind of like wandering around. He's wandering around outside in the woods. He's just wandering around. He's not well. He's just not well. And so Edward's guys capture him, and they have him in the Tower of London. In London, do you remember I showed you that clip last week, the history of the tower? So they've got him there. So it's not a bad place, is it? It's a very nice place. It doesn't become a torture chamber for another few years. Right at the moment, it's a nice place to be. So we've got Henry captured, and he's living in the tower. The queen, the Red Queen, she is also captured, but she's ransomed by France. All right, so they pay it, they release her, and she's going to go where? To France. So now she's in France with her son. Margaret gets a pardon, right? Margaret gets a pardon because she's married to Stafford, and what do they have to do in return for that pardon? They have to be loyal to Edward. But think about it. Think about how hard that would be for Margaret, because her son is what? A Lancaster. Exactly, Dot. You've got it exactly right, and that becomes important. Okay, now Elizabeth plays a huge role in everything that went down because she knows that she's low-born, but she's coming into the situation. And so she's going to do something to elevate herself, her house, her family, right? So what does she do?
She married. She makes all her relatives.
Excellent, yes. Yes, did everyone hear what Dot said?
No.
She makes all of her relatives courtiers. They're going to get all the best jobs in the court. All right? So all of the Lancasters are going to be out, and all of the York people are going to come in, and they're going to take all of these prime positions in court. All right? So she's getting rid of the old, and she's bringing in the new. Okay, the other thing she does, which is pretty outrageous, is she starts marrying her relatives to the Lancaster nobility. She's marrying her relatives to the Lancaster nobility. And it got so bad that in one instance, she married her 67-year-old aunt. No, she married her 20-year-old brother to a Lancaster 67-year-old aunt. You think you think he was grateful for that? Yeah, I don't know. Yes, all right. So they were so outrageous. It was so obvious what she was doing. So she is trying to get all this power because of her insecurity, because of the status of her family. So she needs to build that up and put all of her people in all of these positions. How do you think the prior people felt about that? That didn't go over too well, did it? And especially with Warwick, because what's happening to him?
No longer pulling the string.
He is getting squeezed out. He is getting squeezed out. And so he comes up with a different plan. And his plan is, I'm going to go after the next brother down. Edward has his next brother, who is George. Remember the three brothers? All right, so George is next. Okay, he's the Duke of Clarence. But he has mental illness. Consistently, we're seeing that he was just unstable, and it got worse as time went on. So Warwick probably thought, all right, I tried to control Edward, and that didn't work. He seems to be telling me he wants to be his own man. He's letting his wife take over everything, and he's squeezing me out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go for the next one down, and we're going to stage a coup against Edward. All right, and he was thinking he would install George, the brother George. Okay, so Warwick is not really, he's a great military man, but he's not a good political strategist because he really didn't have the public support for this. So he didn't have support from all the nobles to do this. So he and George, they capture Edward, and they're holding him in a castle. They're holding him in prison. You know, they're imprisoning him. But they don't have support from everybody else to follow through with this. So they know that they're kind of defeated. So now what do? Now what do? Well, they're explaining to Edward, we were really doing this for your own good. We captured you, and we're imprisoning you for your own good. And the reason for that, they're telling him, is because we believe that your wife is a witch and that she has cast a spell on you, and you really aren't in control of your decisions. Now, at this time, was witchcraft something that was a real thing to the people? Yeah, they believed in it. They believed in it. And so Warwick and George are telling Edward, yeah, we did this thing to you, but we were just trying to protect you. We were protecting you from your wife, the witch. So, of course, we know what happens next, right? Of course, Edward's not going to buy this at all, and he's going to have them tried for treason, correct? No. He says, okay, guys, I understand you were doing this just to help me out, and I forgive you. I forgive you, and all's forgotten, and we're just going to go on from here. Do you believe that? Do you believe he did that? They tried to unthrone him, and he forgives them. It's very surprising, right? Very surprising. In fact, Warwick and George both were really surprised. They fully expected that they were going to be beheaded or hung for treason. They were very surprised. So they somehow get away with it. What do you think Warwick should do in this situation now?
Kind of disappeared.
He should just get out of there, right? He got this miraculous reprieve, and he decides he's just going to not lay low, not kind of, go live a quiet life and he get away with this thing. No, because that is not his style. All right, he's going to be in the thick of it. And you have to remember at this time, okay, if you're a landowner, you're a baron, you're nobility, what is the greatest thing? What's the most important thing? Warfare, battle, valor, right? All of that. Okay, that's the most important thing to them. So he's not going to go away, unfortunately. Too bad for him, because now we're going to perpetuate these wars. All right, and now nothing's changed. So even though they tried to warn him that his wife was just bad news, taking over everything, causing great upheaval in the country, what does Edward do? Nothing. Nothing. So everything stays the same. And because everything stays the same, Warwick's getting more and more and more angry. All right? And he gets so angry that something absolutely unthinkable is now about to happen. You remember the Red Queen, Margaret of Anjou. Where is she? She's in France, right? So Warwick thinks to himself, who hates Edward more than me? Who could possibly hate Edward more than me? Well, it would be Margaret Queen, former queen, all right? She wants her son in that throne, right? So Warwick is thinking, if I can get her and armies supporting her, then we can go in and unseat Edward. Except in order for her to be willing to do that, who would have to be placed back on the throne? What? Henry. Not George, but Henry. All right. Now, the other thing to know is that the King of France is perfectly willing to help them out with whatever they need. Because France hates England, right? England they hate each other. So the King of France is absolutely happy to facilitate this whole thing. They're going to facilitate this whole thing and develop, they're going to assemble armies, and the whole plan is to put Henry back on the throne. Margaret's son will then be heir to the throne, and that's what she wants. So the armies go in to England, and it happens so quickly that when Edward finds out they're on their way, he has to flee to go assemble an army to defend against this. And his wife, Elizabeth, she is going to take her children and go to Westminster, and she's going to claim what? Sanctuary, which means that she can go into the church and she can be safe. Nobody can touch her. So she's got to claim safety in Westminster and stay there until the situation changes. All right, so now Warwick and Margaret of Anjou are successful. They go to the Tower and they get Henry and they put him back on the throne. I'm thinking, I wasn't there, but I'm telling you, I can just, I feel for Henry so badly. He was probably like, no, leave me alone. I don't want to go do that again. I'm sure he didn't want this. He was a pawn. This poor man was a pawn in this. So they put him back on the throne. And when that happens, Margaret does something very, very risky. Remember, she gets a pardon from Edward in exchange for what? Loyalty. But when Henry's back on the throne, all she ever thinks about is her son. So she's able to get her son back. He's about 13 or 14 at this point. She gets her son back, and she takes him to the court and introduces him to his uncle, Henry the King. Now, this is very dangerous because if Edward regains power, she's done something that defies the pardon, right? But she does it anyway. She's going to take that risk. And it's recorded, we don't know if this is true or propaganda, but it's recorded that when King Henry met Margaret's son, Henry, that he said this to him, in this very kind of a lucid moment that he was having, this is he unto whom both we and our adversaries must yield and give over the dominion. What a bizarre thing to say to somebody who is of the Beaufort line and a Tudor. Because do they have any hope? None. So, did that actually happen, or was that propaganda? We don't know. All right, so now we have the armies, and the armies are assembled, okay? And we have the Red Queen's army. It is Margaret of Anjou with the backing of France. She also has Warwick, right? But she also has George, the younger brother of Edward, going up against him. Edward's army. Edward's army is smaller. So Edward has his guys, and then he also has the armies of his youngest brother, Richard. Richard is with Edward. George is with the opposing side. Tewkesbury, it's a town in England, and that's where the battle is going to happen. And again, Edward's forces are smaller than the Queen's forces. But right as the battle begins, guess what George does?
Turn to close.
Yes. Yes. He switches sides, and now he is going to fight with his brothers. So now the three brothers are in league together to fight against the Queen of England, France, and their former mentor, their father's best friend, who turned against them, the Duke of Warwick. They're going to fight against him. And guess who wins? Edward. And in that battle, Warwick dies. So Warwick dies. So that's the end of him right here. But more importantly, in this battle, the Battle of Tewkesbury, do you know who else dies? Margaret of Anjou and Henry VI's son dies. So now Edward comes back. He comes back victoriously, and the very first thing he does is he has to run to Westminster because who's there? His wife and his daughters, because the family had to go there for protection. So he goes there right away, first thing, and he is met with a wonderful surprise. While she was there, she gave birth to their first son. So not only has Edward won this battle, got both of his brothers back with him. Richard never left, but his brother George back with him. He now discovers that he has an heir. He has a son. And then subsequently, there'll be another boy. So there's Edward, and then he has his next son, Richard, which I assume is named after his father. So one named after him, and then the next boy named after his father. All right. Now, do you think that Edward, after all of this, is going to be the forgiving guy that he had been originally? Nope, not this time. Not this time. So it is a mystery, but somehow, a few days after this battle, Henry VI, who's back in the tower, he dies. And so it's assumed that that was on the order of Edward, because he's just not going to play this game anymore. What happens to Margaret of Anjou? Yeah, she's back, and she went back to France, and she died in poverty at the age of 52. And then I just have the saddest thing. You know, George, his brother George, and he'd been unstable, and then as time went on, as he got older, he got like more and more paranoid. He was expressing more paranoia, and it culminated in him going up against his brother yet again. So he was going to try to take over. So he was tried for treason, and Edward allowed for a private execution because it was his brother, not a public execution. And what is said, I don't know if this is true, but what is said is that the private execution method was that George was drowned in a barrel of wine. That was his request. That's how he wanted to die. He wanted to die drowned in a barrel of wine. But it was a private execution, so we don't know exactly what happened. All right, so now we have to go back to who's left. Who is left in this Game of Thrones? Do you know Game of Thrones was based on the Wars of the Roses? Yeah. All right, so who do we have left? We still have Margaret, don't we? Every time this poor woman turns around, right, doesn't her life change?
Yeah.
All right, if you think about it, the Wars of the Roses lasted 30 years. And in 30 years, power changes hands 7 times. 7 times. So she is trying to deal with this. She's trying to deal with whoever's in power. And what is her only goal?
Her son.
Her son. That's her only goal. She's been spending all of this time just trying to get her son some land, his lands back. All right, so what happens to Margaret? Remember, she's married to Stafford, who has to fight. He had to fight for Edward because that's how they got their pardon. And when he did, he suffered some injuries, and then he later died of his wounds. So now we have Margaret, who is
A widow again.
she's a widow again. She's still very young. She's very young, and now she's got to do something. She's got to take this situation, right? It's back in the hands of the Yorks now, and she's got to do something that's going to help her son. So how can she protect herself and help her son? So now she's got to get married again, and then this time she decides, and when it goes back over to the Yorks, her son Henry has to flee again. So now he's back in France. So she decides that this time her best way to maneuver this is to marry this man, Lord Stanley. And the reason for that is because Lord Stanley, he's very wealthy. He's a very wealthy landowner. But he's such a high position that he is in the court of Edward. That puts Margaret right in the court. So if she wants to ingratiate herself to Edward, is she better able to do it from there?
Sure.
Absolutely. She's got plenty of opportunity to do it from here, and she gets to know his wife and the family, and she's going to do everything to present herself in the best possible light, and she does that. Now, for the next 11 years, she's doing that. England knows peace. Of the 30 years of the wars, there is a time of peace. There's a reprieve here under Edward. Margaret is able to work on him and gain his trust. And at this point in time, these 11 years, she is able to do that. She's gained his trust, and she has convinced him to give her son back his lands. Edward signs the paperwork saying that Henry can return to England safely and that he can become the landowner. The landowner. Okay? So finally, right? Finally. Except that what happens next turns everybody's world upside down. Do you know what happened? Edward died.
Because
He died. He was 42. And he died. He died. All right? So when he dies, everything else is going to be chaotic, right?
Up for grabs.
What?
Up for grabs.
It's up for grabs. Yes. Everything's going to be hurled into chaos because we still have Lancasters and Yorks. All right? So his wife is what? Lancaster. She put all her people into these positions, yes?
Yes.
And now the only brother that's left is Richard. Remember young Richard? Yes. All right, so now what's going to happen is Richard is going to panic because he thinks that the Woodvilles, Elizabeth's family, they're probably going to kill him to get rid of him so it can be them, right? And then the Woodvilles are thinking that Richard is going to assemble people to get rid of them because they're only there because of his big brother, yes? All right, so now everybody is panicking and everybody is having a reaction that is just going to set off absolute chaos. So the first thing that has to happen is Richard knows that he has got to go get Edward's eldest boy, right? Remember they had a boy? He's 12 years old at this point. So he's got to go get him. So Richard is young Edward's uncle. But young Edward has really been raised by his mother's family. So where are his loyalties? With the mother. So Richard knows, I must have custody of the new king, the new 12-year-old king. So he goes and he gets him and takes him into what he's calling protective custody. All right? And then he thinks to himself, I will also need to have the brother. Remember, there's the two boys. There's Edward and there's Richard. One's 9 and one's 12. All right, so I've got to take them both into protective custody. And then the next thing he did was he arrested he arrested the uncles so that they couldn't interfere with this, right? And then he's got the two boys, the two princes, and he's going to hold them in the tower. They're going to be in the tower, okay? Now he's going to put off the coronation of young Edward, all right? It gets to the point where Richard actually murders a few people, nobles. I'm going fast now because I'm running out of time. All right? And now Elizabeth, because she's seeing the behavior of Richard get a little erratic, so she has to go back where? To protect herself.
France.
No, she's going back to Westminster. Yeah, she's got to quickly get protection. So she goes back to Westminster, so she's in sanctuary again. And while she's doing that, Richard is now going to betray his dead brother. He's become to the point where he is willing to betray his dead brother. And what he does is he digs up evidence. He's digging up evidence that his brother secretly married another woman before he married Elizabeth. And what would that make all of their children? Illegitimate. Not only did Richard dig up evidence to call his nephews illegitimate, but he also came up with evidence that claims Edward himself was illegitimate. Edward himself. So he is accusing his own mother. Look at the lengths that they'll go to. You see what's happening? It's just so crazy, right? And it gets worse. It just gets worse and worse. But with whatever evidence he comes up with, he's able to convince Parliament that the children are illegitimate. And what does Parliament do? They crown Richard. They crown Richard. He is King of England. Now, the whole time that this is going on, the two boys in the tower, you know, the two princes in the tower, well, people had seen them outside playing. They were playing outside the tower on a daily basis until they weren't. Then all of a sudden, the boys were gone, and nobody saw them, and Richard could not produce them. Margaret Beaufort knew that she had to come up with something. She had to come up with something if she was going to save herself and her son. And this is when she comes up with this masterful plot to get rid of Richard. She's not going to spend another 20 years ingratiating herself to him. That wouldn't work, would it? So she comes up with this idea. If Henry and Edward's daughter marry, would that bring together Lancaster and York through a marriage like that? All right, but she needs Elizabeth to be on board with it. And she can't reach her because she's in sanctuary. But Elizabeth, she knows her sons are gone. She knows her sons are dead and that Richard killed them. And she is, with everything that's happened, she's utterly distraught. And so Margaret has Elizabeth's doctor, who is the only one that can go in to see her, bring messages. So the doctor brings messages back and forth between the two women. And they come up with this plot to take over, and it will end in a marriage between Henry Tudor and Elizabeth of York. Her name's Elizabeth too. All right, so these two women come up with this plan to get rid of Richard III. Now, it's kind of a crazy plan, isn't it? Because Margaret Beaufort is who? She's of the line that cannot claim succession. So can Henry? No. All right? Henry should be barred from succession. But she gets support because everybody knows that Richard has killed the two boys in the tower. So she knows she's got support. So she's going to go forward. She's going to try this. She's going to give it a shot. And so what she's able to do is she's able to get a message to her son in France, and she sends him money for an army. He actually comes, and there's weather issues and other things, but it fails. Now Richard knows, because there was an attempt, even though it failed, he now knows who his enemy is. And he knows it's coming from Margaret. He's got her under house arrest. The only reason he doesn't kill her is because he knows he needs strong landowners like Lord Stanley, her husband. All right, she makes this decision. She is going to go all or nothing, okay? She's not going to get any reprieve if he finds out, if her next attempt doesn't work, she will die. She will die. And so she's made a decision. She's going to take that chance. She's going to go for it. So she sends him more money. She's got more supporters on her side, and she gets messages to him. And Henry VII, Henry Tudor, comes to England. It's at the Battle of Bosworth Field. With his army. Richard is there to meet him. Now look over here. So you see, here's Henry's army, and here's Richard's army. Henry's outnumbered. And what is Margaret's husband doing?
Hanging out on the side.
He's just hanging out on the side. That's exactly right. He's just watching. He's watching. Nobody knows what he's going to do. He's sitting there with all his men. And nobody understands what side is he on? What's he going to do? What's he going to do? Nobody knows what's about to happen until Richard and Henry meet on the battlefield. Richard is winning this thing, and he is only yards away from Henry. He is about to kill Henry when from the hillside, Stanley sees this, and he decides, now is when I'm going to join the battle. They still don't know whose side he's going to be on. He comes down, he swoops in, and who does he go to help? Henry, exactly, Henry. And so he comes in just in the nick of time to save Henry's life. Richard keeps fighting. He doesn't try to flee the battle. He knows this is it. He wants to die in battle. He wants to die with valor. And so he dies, Richard, and it is Lord Stanley, Thomas Stanley, the husband of Henry's mother, that picks up the crown, and he crowns Henry Tudor, King of England, right there on the field. And in that moment, after 331 years, you have the absolute collapse of the House of Plantagenet, England's longest reigning rule. It's over. It is done. And so bizarrely, the 30 years of the Wars of the Roses, look at all the people that died. The war was supposed to be between the white and the red, the Lancasters and the Yorks, and ultimately it was neither. Who comes up victorious? Henry Tudor, a Tudor. So all those deaths. And it's not for either. It's for a brand new thing. And the brand new thing is this. This is the Tudor rose. Do you see what it is? It's the red, exactly. It's the red and the white. And Henry VII, he decided he's going to have that everywhere. He wants to show the country that they're joined together. It's over. This feud is over, that he and his wife, Elizabeth of York, have ended it by joining the two together. And you can see the Tudor rose is really everywhere, right? That Henry and that Elizabeth are the parents of this guy.
Yeah.
Yes, that we all know. And I believe that Queen Elizabeth is named after his mother. So that the Elizabeth, the daughter of Edward, she is the mother of Henry. All right. So, oh my gosh, that was exhausting. That was absolutely exhausting. And I'm sure that you all need a break, or in other words, I need a break. Somebody had requested something else, and I think if we do this, we can go back to this at another time. So next week, we're going to start a brand new series, and that series is going to be on the Gilded Age. What do you think? You ready? You ready for a change? All right. All right, so everybody, thank you so much. I will see you next week.